October. And you know the thing I really love? I love coming to the same place over and over again because I get to know the people a little bit. So if you want to speak to me after service, I'd love to chat with you in the fellowship hall. So today's talk title is Make a Joyful Noise, right? And what I know about you guys from being here last time is you can make a bit of a joyful noise. So it's good. It's a good talk title for you guys. And there's a supporting quote that says, if you can laugh at it, you can live with it. And that's true, isn't it? If you can laugh at it, you can live with it. And those two things go really well with your theme, which has been choose joy. Choose joy. And those two words, it's very simple, right? Two words, but they mean a lot. And they each have a lot of meaning in and of themselves. If you go with choose or choice, that's basically about as basic a science of mind, the philosophy that we teach here at Centers for Spiritual Living, as you can get. Because we teach that our lives are our choice. That we create our lives by our thoughts, by our feelings, by our beliefs. We put that into the mind that God is, and it reflects back to us as our life. And so choice, we're always in choice. Reverend Catherine said, I listened to all her talks for this month, and she said one a few weeks ago, she said that pain is inevitable, that suffering is optional. And that's because we're always in choice. We're in choice on whether or not we're going to suffer, even when there's pain. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. There's also joy. Now, I want to make sure you recognize that we're saying choose joy, not choose happiness. Because there's a big difference between happiness and joy. Happiness is what we feel when something happens in our life, when there's an event or something comes into our life. When I get a raise at work, I'm happy, right? When I get a new car, I'm happy. When I find a new love in my life, I'm happy. And those are all wonderful things. It's good to be happy. But the problem is those events, those things in our life, there is nothing so constant as change. It's going to change. Whatever it is that we hook our hats to in order to be happy, it will eventually change. And so the better thing is to choose joy over happiness, because joy is the fundamental idea of the whole universe. It's one of those principles that we say is the truth of God. Love, peace, joy, wholeness, harmony, all these things that we ascribe to God, they are the root, they are the foundation of the very universe. And so when we choose joy, what we're doing is we're digging into the foundation of all of life, and we're saying, that's part of me. That's who I am. I'm choosing joy. And so, we also have the book of the month, which Victoria read from earlier. It's a beautiful book. I understand it's in your bookshop, so if you haven't had a chance to peruse it or buy it, take a look at it. It's a really good book. It's by the Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. And it's called the Book of Joy. Now, I want to start off with this talk today with this. You should have gotten one of these along with the program this morning. And if you look at it, it's got two sides to it, and it's really two masks. One is the mask of joy, of comedy. The other one is the mask of tragedy. And you'll recognize these because they're hanging up at a lot of, places at theaters and other things, billboards that have to do with plays. You'll usually see these two symbols. And I started thinking about these symbols because I was like, I got to talk about making a joyful noise. I need to talk about joy. And where am I filled with joy? I love the theater. I love going to plays. And so I thought about these two guys, and I realized that there's a deep tradition that goes along with these masks. back in ancient Greece, the actors used to put one of these masks in front of their face, the happy one if they were doing a comedic character, and the sad one if they were doing a tragic character. So it was kind of like the Westerns, you know, where you had a white hat on if you were a good guy and a black hat on if you were a bad guy. It makes it easy for us to tell which one is which, right? But there's even more history behind that, which is that each of these masks, these two masks, they actually are representative of two of the 9 muses. Now, the 9 muses are part of the Greek mythology. They are each inspirational goddesses that were born of Zeus, the father of all the gods, the most powerful of the gods, and a goddess named Mnemosyne. And she was the god of remembrance and memory, which is funny because I have a hard time remembering her name. But anyway, those two came together and they had 9 daughters, and these are the 9 muses. And these symbols symbolize 2 of them. Now, we're going to start off with the unhappy face. This is represented by the muse of tragedy, whose name is Melpomene. That's it, something along those lines. Anyway, she's the muse of tragedy, and she started off not as the muse of tragedy. When she was born, she was the muse of life and despair. That's an odd combination. I'm still trying to get my mind around that. How do you get to be the muse of life and despair? But she wasn't always the muse of life and despair, because when she grew up, she decided to sleep with her father, Zeus, and ended up giving him a girl child, and which I guess was okay. They're gods, they get to do whatever they want. But his wife, Hera, wasn't so amused, right? And so she was mad. She cursed her, and now she became the muse of death. I think that's a demotion, you know, life and despair down to death. Maybe, I'm not sure. But anyway, so then she goes on. She hasn't learned her lesson. She sleeps with him again, has another boy child this time. And Hera is equally mad, and she curses her this time to be barren, so she can't have any more children. And she becomes the muse of tragedy. So here she is, this odd mix of life, despair, death, tragedy. She's a hot mess, really, is what she is. So now we get to the happy face one. Now she represents Thalia, the muse of comedy, right? And she, her name is founded off of the word that means in Greek, it means to flourish and to be verdant. And verdant means to be green and hugely abundant and bountiful. And so that's a pretty nice thing. And when she decides to have children, she doesn't sleep with her father. She goes and has children with Apollo, and she has a happy life, and she never gets cursed, right? And so I started thinking about it, because the tradition in the Greek theater and the Greek life was that you would invite these muses into your life. You would invite them to come in and inspire you on whatever you wanted to. You know, they were the muses of arts and theater and literature and science. So you got them to come in and inspire you on these topics. And I thought, well, what if I asked these two to inspire me? You know, and it kind of made me think of those cartoons where you would have, you know, you had the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, and you get wildly different answers from them, right? The angel and the devil. Well, I think it would be kind of similar on this one. So if I started out with the muse of tragedy here, whispering into my shoulder, what would she whisper? I think she would whisper this. She would go, Scott, what you need to do in life is you need to make as much money as you can. Because if you make as much money as you can, then you can afford the fast car, and you can afford the fine wine, and you can afford a nice house. And all those things are going to bring in a bunch of friends who want your money. And, and you'll probably attract a really beautiful spouse, and your life will be great. Except for she's the muse of tragedy. And you know it's going to have a tragic ending. Or you can listen to the muse of comedy. And she, I think, would say, you know, Scott, what you need to do is you need to go out and love everybody. And you need to know that each and every one of you is connected at a cellular level. And you need to feel compassion for all these people. And when you do that, that's going to bring you joy. Now, which one am I going to listen to? Well, I think it depends on whether I'm in one of my sane moods or insane moods, to be quite honest, right? But when I'm sane, when I'm thinking logically and I understand what I'm thinking, I think I'm going to go along with comedy, right? So if I choose to make my life a comedy, then how am I going to live my life? Well, first of all, I'm going to start laughing at myself more, right? And I'm going to laugh at you too, because it's a comedy. And I'm going to invite you to laugh at me, because we're in a comedy. My life is a comedy. And more than that, when I make a mistake, I'm going to laugh at it. And when you make a mistake, I'm going to laugh at you too. That guy who just cut me off on the freeway, I'm going to laugh at him. I'm going, oh, look at that guy, he's so funny. But, you know, what it's going to do is it's going to make my life lighter. It's going to make my life more joyful. And I bet you I'll be making a more joyful noise in my life. So I want to switch gears a little bit and go to the book, because the book really is spectacular. It's a great book. I love the Dalai Lama. I love Archbishop Tutu. And it's called The Book of Joy. And as I was reading The Book of Joy, I thought, oh, this is going to be really good. I'm going to be laughing a lot. It's the Book of Joy, right? And that was true, except when it wasn't. Now, I'm going to admit it, I tend to be an easy crier. Nowadays. Now, when I was 20, no crying then. But since I have learned to be more in a spiritual life, less logical, my training was as a physicist. And so my world was very logical. And it wasn't that things in my life were not something there that I might want to cry about. It was that I had walled that whole experience off. And now I don't. I just open myself up. And I feel what I feel. And I think that's a good thing. But I was reading this book, and I was finding a lot of joy in it, a lot of tears, a lot of laughter. But one of the things that I was wondering was, why is it that it was called the Book of Joy? If you get these two really powerful spiritual leaders together, why did they concentrate on joy and not love? Because Buddhism is all about compassion. Christianity, the word of Jesus, is all about love. Well, I think about halfway through the book I finally figured it out. They say that the scientists of the world have come together and they've studied humans' emotions, and what they've found is that there are really only 4 basic emotions. 4. It's not that we don't have very complex emotions that are way beyond what 4 emotions would be, but those emotions are these, they're kind of a mixture of these 4 basic emotions. And those 4 basic emotions are fear, anger, sadness, or joy. So if you're going to pick between those 4, which one are you going to pick? Joy. I'm going to pick joy, yeah. Fear, anger, sadness, no. Joy, yes. Now, the Dalai Lama says that if we do that, if we recognize that as a truth, and we say, I'm going to avoid, it's not that I'm going to never feel it, but I'm not going to concentrate on feeling those things. I'm going to kind of avoid these things, fear, anger, and sadness, and I'm going to concentrate on seeing joy in my life and feeling joy in my beingness, that what I get is I get mental immunity out of that, which just simply means that I am buoyed up by joy always. And therefore, when there is heartbreak that goes on in my life, I'm not broken. Right? And when there's hardship that comes into my life, I'm not made hard. I get to still be plain. I still get to be soft. Because joy is lifting me up. Now, Ernest Holmes would say kind of something similar, except for, well, we all know Ernest. He speaks in really long sentences, right? So I'm going to break it up into 3 parts, but I think it's really important. He says, our focus dictates the attitude of our journey and the state of our destination. Well, that's basic science of mind. It's really very, very basic. He's saying that what we focus on is what we get back into our lives. And then he goes on to say, we can let our mind wander to its darkest corners where it tells us the sad and scary stories, paralyzing us and convincing us that these corners are the safest place to live in. Really? Wow. So what happens is when we concentrate on these negative emotions, when we concentrate on fear, anger, and sadness, our mind takes us down into these dark recesses and says, here, take a blanket and cover your head, right? Because you'll be safe down here. Stay in the dark, be safe. But Ernest Holmes goes on to say, or we can let our mind wander to its open fields where the horizon is inviting us on a journey to discover people, self, love, and the miracles of the unknown. Isn't that nice? Which one would you rather have? I would rather be in the light rather than in the dark. I'd rather be having the horizon invite me to new experiences and knowing more love in my life, knowing myself as the joy that God is. Absolutely, that's where I would go. So, I was telling you that I was finding the book and I was reading it, and sometimes I would laugh, sometimes I would cry. And it reminded me of the old thing that you could laugh until you cry. But I was finding that sometimes as I looked at my emotions and everything as I was reading the book, the reality was I was crying until I laughed in some of the book. And I want to tell you one of the stories where that was true for me. It was a story of Tenzin. And Tenzin is a 7th grader who lives in the Tibetan children's village. Now, the story of the book is that the Archbishop Tutu comes to Dharamsala, which is in India, not in Tibet. Right? The Dalai Lama does not live in Tibet. Even though he is the spiritual leader and the secular leader of the Tibetan people, he no longer lives in Tibet because in 1950-something, the Chinese invaded Tibet. And he was in his teenage years at that point, and he's the leader of these people. He's being invaded. Well, he stuck around as long as he could until he found out that they were planning on capturing him and imprisoning him. And at that point, they had the Tibetan people rose up in order to cause enough confusion that he could get out of the country. Which was good. It's good that the Dalai Lama got out of the country, but 1,000 people are said to have died in that uprising. And he made it to India, and India has been a great host. They have allowed him to live in Dharamsala, which is in northern India, up in the mountains, and they've allowed him to create these Tibetan children's villages. And why do they need to create the Tibetan children's villages? It's because the Chinese have said that they don't want the Tibetan culture in their country anymore. They've annexed Tibet, and that's it. And so they don't allow the Tibetan culture to be taught in Tibet. They don't allow the language to be taught. And so thousands of parents send their children when they're 5 years old, 5 years old, out of the country to these schools. And so this little boy was telling the Dalai Lama this story. It was his 80th birthday, and he was having this celebration there, and they're telling this story. And so he tells the Dalai Lama the story of himself as a little boy being taken from his mother. His father tells him to say goodbye to his mother, and he knows that that's the last time he's probably going to see his mother. And he leaves India, or he leaves Tibet, and his father takes him to India. They walk, they ride yaks, but they always have to obey the army, the Chinese army, because the Chinese army doesn't want them to leave. And they have to climb the mountains to get out of Tibet, which are not the little tiny molehill mountains that we have here, comparatively. These are the Himalayas. These are huge mountains that they have to get across. And what Tenzin tells the Dalai Lama is, he says, when he said goodbye to his mother and he knew he was going to say goodbye to his father, all the joy left him. And I recognize that. I recognize that feeling. Because when I was 7 years old, I had to go and live with my aunt for a while. I lived with her for over a year. And when I left, I didn't know if I was ever going to come back. And so I recognized that dark feeling. That feeling where no joy is. But the good news is, and this is where the joy comes back, laughter comes back, is that for both Tenzin and I, we found joy again. I'm a very joyful person. And Tenzin tells the Dalai Lama that when he came to the Tibetan children's village, he found joy again. He found joy because the teachers that are there, they understand that they are the surrogates of all these children that have had to leave their parents, and so they become the parents to these kids. And on top of that, there's 1,000 children who are all in the same boat that understand each other and they love each other. And then on top of that, the Dalai Lama goes to see each and every one of these kids as they come in. And he blesses them. And he thanks them for their sacrifice so that the Tibetan culture can be propagated on. And so Tenzin says he found joy. And now he's a very joyful kid. And as I was reading this story, I burst out into laughter. Yes, that's the way life is supposed to be. We are supposed to find joy again. And the thing that I realized out of this storytelling was that I realized that here was this kid that was all the way across the world from me. He lives in Dharamsala, which is on the other side of the planet. I'm probably never going to go there. I am very unlikely to ever meet Tenzin. And yet I have a connection to him. And why is that? I have a connection to him because we are all connected, every last one of us. We call it oneness in science of mind. The Buddhists call it Ubuntu. But it just means that we're all connected. We have 7 billion people on this planet right now, right in this very moment, that we're all connected to. And on top of that, here's the other trick, and this is the real trick. I can feel joy because he felt joy. I can feel joy because I rejoice in his feeling joy. And that is called mudita in the Buddhist tradition, and it is a powerful medicine for joy because now I have 7 billion joy generators out there in the world that I can count on to feed me joy all the time. so I can live a joyous life. I do live a joyous life. And when I forget, because I'm going to forget, because I'm human, I can go back to these principles and I can remember that I live a joyous life. And so I just want to take you back to a few of the things that we talked about today as a reminder. Right? When I'm feeling a little low, I can remember that statement. If we can laugh at it, then we can live with it. But I would say there's a corollary to that, which is if I have lived through it, then I can laugh at it. So I just invite you all to remember that you're alive right now. Right now. So whatever has happened in the past, you've already lived through it. So go ahead and laugh at it. It's okay. Whatever it is. It's something that we can laugh at because we have chosen joy and we have chosen to make joyful noise about everything. We've chosen joy rather than looking at fear, sadness, and anger. And most of all, we have decided to listen to our muse, the muse of comedy, and remember that our life is a comedy. It's something to laugh at. And people are someone to laugh with. So I just want to leave you with one thought out of the book, which is from Desmond Tutu. He says, "We people who care must be attractive." Now, why should we be attractive? Well, we need to be attractive because the things that we know, us people that understand that we are all tied together and that we need to be compassionate with each other and we need to choose joy over all those other emotions, we need to be attractive. So he says, go out and laugh. Have a good time in your compassion. And that's what I want for you this coming week, is I want you to go out and laugh and have a great time. Thank you. And I'll